great to welcome Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery to the Cipher Brief studio. Mark, I know you've been watching this NATO summit. You actually wrote a piece in the Cipher Brief earlier this week, really encouraging the member states to contribute that full 5%, really focusing in on why that 1.5% addition was so important. It looks like everybody pretty much came to the table. What do you think of the result of the summit? Success or still a lot of work?
So look, I think an alliance like NATO is always a lot of work, right? I mean, you got 32 countries, you have 32 ideas, you have 32 threat assessments. But I actually think it went exceptionally well. It went exceptionally well because Secretary General Rutte did a great job. He did a great job corralling the players, with the exception of Spain, but he did a great job with 31. And then he did a terrific job managing President Trump. And that's no easy feat. Probably a little easier when you're 6'5", but he was able to do it, and I really think it's important because this was a landmark summit.
Mm-hmm.
The Hague 2025, we remembered, is where there was a true commitment to deterring Russia and, if necessary, defeating them if they were to invade a NATO state. And the 5% is certainly part of it, but the language, the direction, the focus, the kind of, the crowding back into the United States, all that happened at this summit.
Yeah. And we were speaking a little bit earlier with someone I know, Admiral Jim Stavridis, who was saying that unity is such an important part of what needed to come out of this summit. And it looks like they got that unity. One thing, though, that wasn't really discussed in any kind of depth was Ukraine. And obviously, with Russia being sort of the looming cloud over NATO, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Well, thanks. Two things. And first of all, I fully support Ukraine, and I think we should do as much as we can to help them. I recognize, though, that this 5% and the discussion of whether Article 5 applies, not getting the president back and battering that, really was about signatory states.
Mm-hmm.
Separate from that, and there's a deep issue there that we have to be agreed that we're going to defend Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, particularly. I think they're the four most vulnerable states if they're attacked. Separate from that is the issue that right now, the state in combat, the European country in combat with Russia that was illegally invaded by Russia, Ukraine, has relied heavily on NATO support because most of NATO recognizes that if you don't deter Russia here, their next ambition could be Moldova, but it could be Estonia. It could be Romania or Georgia, but it could be the Souvlaki Gap and a land bridge to Kaliningrad. So with all that in play, it was critical that Zelensky got a good reception. I think he did. And the fact that the Ukrainian section was shortened from 42 paragraphs to 10 paragraphs, I don't care. In the end, it said, we support Ukraine. The NATO contact group is working hard to support Ukraine. European countries are giving Ukraine a lot of money. And here's the most important part. For the first time since his election, President Trump indicated he would maintain the defense industrial base open for Ukraine or Europeans to purchase the critical air defense systems, and even averred to potentially the U.S. being involved in that, the critical air defense systems they need, because there is no European alternative to the Patriot line at Raytheon or to the AMRAAM line, in the United States, which is the weapon that goes in their NASAMS air defense system. They absolutely need this. There's no European alternative to 15, to 1 million rounds a year of 155. You're going to need the U.S. to be involved in that. And therefore, it was critical for the president to say that these lines are available to Ukraine. And he did that on 2 or 3 different occasions. It wasn't as clean as I'd like it, but he clearly indicated that was his intention.
Yeah, and I'm sure NATO is hoping that he sticks to that as well, and as well as Ukraine, because Russia has continued to just hammer Ukraine with missile attacks. Mark, next steps for NATO. What do you think?
Well, first, I was glad to see the 5%. I was really glad that he broke it down to 3.5 and 1.5, mostly because they'd have never gotten to 5% on planes, tanks, and ships. I mean, you'd have had more than Spain break away then. You might have had like the UK, France, and Germany, or they'd have put a due date like 2050, something that doesn't really matter. I'm disappointed it slipped to 2035. Should have been 2032, like the Eastern Europeans wanted. Most of the Eastern Europeans, by the way, at 4%, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and Poland passing through 4% already, headed to 5% within the next 12 months. So, and that's just on planes, trains, and aircraft, ships, and tanks kind of stuff.
Yeah.
What I really loved about this, as I wrote in the article for the Cipher Brief, was the 1.5%. This is about getting cyber right and critical infrastructure protection right. It's about building your defense industrial base. But talk about cyber and critical infrastructure. When you say what's next for NATO, so at the last summit, they approved a NATO kind of a critical infrastructure center, and they put it at SACEUR. That's critical. Because what we have to do now is take that center as it comes online in the next year, SACEUR's war plans and this money, and build the infrastructure that's necessary for the United States to flow our forces from the United States, the UK forces from across the Channel, the French forces from deep in Europe. All three of those, brigades, divisions, and even corps have to be able to flow across Northern Europe, from the ports and the airfields in Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, Poland, Luxembourg, France, and get to the fight. That is not protected right now. That critical infrastructure is not prioritized and protected in a meaningful way. NATO has to be. So to me, the big takeaway is that 1.5% added to that new center, added to SACEUR having reasonably close to real plans. And I love the new General Grinkovich. He worked for myself and Admiral Stavridis in EUCOM, doing war plans for me. He was the J35, the operational war planner. I mean, he gets it. And we had real war plans in EUCOM, then NATO didn't. So in my mind, the big NATO takeaway is 1.5%, the cyber center, and a SACEUR with a war plan. If we can now build for ourselves the ligature to deter Russia, and if Russia is foolish enough to attack, defeat Russia in an invasion of an Article 5 defended country.
I think you've pretty much laid it out. It's always such an incredible pleasure talking to you, Mark, just to get your context on this and what comes next and why all this matters. Thank you so much for your time. Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery joining us here in the Cipher Brief studio. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Suzanne.